And now, since I have the, now I go, now it's stuck. Okay, that is not so interesting. So again, also our thing is more, we get what our colleagues tell us and what we have discussed before, and then we had to show what is possible and what is not, under the predefined business models as I have just given, which are at the current inspiration. And I think with the discussion, especially with Mikael and others on the energy system, maybe towards the end of the program, we may fine-tune again something on this inspirations, let's say. We get more inspirations when we talk. And then what we did so far is a checklist of what needs to be considered. That is the normal legal tools, so to say. And what was interesting was just to find out that the checklist has to adapt according to the country, because, as we all know, we don't have a uniform energy law in the Union. We don't have a uniform support mechanism in the Union. So that already makes it different. Or the system sharing, the responsibility sharing is different when we talk about Germany, where, for example, where the energy-intensive industry is not or only partly paying or shouldering the feed-in tariff Umlage, the balancing, but have to do energy efficiency gains in exchange. That's a different story than in other countries. So that makes it clear that we do not come up at the end of the project with one fit-for-all model contract. That would be already open to legal liability of the law firm. So as different, that's what I have seen here. So it is rather a contract guidance which we are working on. Again, we started with the contract outlines under the German law, and then we mirrored against the specificities of the other target country laws. And then we have, for example, what makes it clearly not profitable in Germany because of some legal constraints, for example, and where could be unwanted consequences. These are the questions which are then later really important for industry, for example, who would try to go this in one of our contract outlines. We left it general. We cannot go into technical specificities. It's a difference if you have a big wind energy on site, or if you have biogas, or whatever you do on the technology. And yeah, keep the language simple. That's not easy for lawyers. So we had to make certain assumptions. And as I said before, we have this split into submodels, and then we asked, based on these assumptions, which contracts are needed. If more than one, maybe a framework contract could make sense. That was what we were asking in the beginning. And then, yeah, what are the main points we should deal with? Only electricity supply, the construction and operation part, financing arrangements, what is about risk and liability. So that is again, as I said before, that's the legal toolbox we then open. For example, what is very different is already the German law on property ownership is really different than the British law. And that is important for the question who can own the renewable energy plant on a given territory of an industry. That has really complete different consequences. And some contractual arrangement may, at least at present, not make sense in certain member states. For example, in Germany, the rules on self-consumption are rather strict when regarding the renewable energy which would be owned and or operated by third parties. We have approached a skeleton structure in our work so far, and we try to identify in each paragraph what parties should lay down, and we tried also to put options in this model. And together with this checklist, with a report, and then later with the fully formulated contract outlines, we would have at the end of the project a toolkit for the parties. So we have the two guidances, as I said before, and now I will show you a little bit from the report where we stand and how it looks at the moment. So again, this is not a contract you would sign. This is just the flow for a contract. And as usual, you start with your objectives, and then we have the alternatives: supply the industry with electricity from a variable renewable energy plant owned and operated by the owner of the renewable energy. And then you would identify it, you would put all the technical work and would put a lot of annex, so that is that's the normal due diligence. You would adapt the electricity demand of the industry through shifting production processes to times of high generation from renewable power plant, for example, as one objective, and you could have other objectives. And this is all under the guidance electricity supply with offsite renewables. Then naturally the conduct of the parties, and then we would put in clauses on the amount of electricity to be delivered from offsite to the site, and then what will happen when you have interruptions or reductions of the supplied amount. The renewable energy provider shall supply electricity to the from variable plants identified, and you should supply without reserve or balancing electricity and net of the own demand. So that becomes now more and more specific. For example, you could have also an obligation for the industry to adapt the production process, demand to generation forecast from the renewable energy in order to make demand and consumption as streamlined as possible. And there is then the question, do we need that, or aren't there price signals would be sufficient? And so we try at the moment to put as many of these variabilities under the guidance into this model. Then there must be an agreement on prices. Is there a minimum price in order to give the renewable energy provider some investment security? Is there, what is with the incentive setting for the industry in order to shift demand? And is it, you must have clarity what is with taxes and surcharges, and also clauses when is to be invoiced and what are the payment schedules, and is there an adaptation to prices when specific conditions change. Then also in some countries, or in most countries, you have to say if you have to prove when it's offsite that the electricity which comes on site is really a renewable energy electricity from that plant, and then you could use the guarantees of origin. You have to have clarity what comes on board, so to say. So we are very fast in the question of metering. We have to touch grid use contracts. That is the obligation of the renewable energy supplier, that he can go into the grid in order to supply you with electricity. And then there's the definition who is in charge for the metering. General conditions is not interesting. Confidentiality, duration of the contract, all standard. Liability standard, and I was so happy about liability. Apparently I have it twice, so don't worry. Force majeure, this is now all transfer of rights, amendments. I think we can leave that because that is normal contract law. More interesting maybe, how would a contract look if it is about electricity bill reduction with on-site renewable? And again, you would start with the objectives. You would clearly define the properties to the energy power plant, and then you would adapt the demand of the intensive industry to production patterns of the use power plant in order to have an optimum between supply and demand. And there, the contract would look a little bit differently. It would be concluded between the parties under which the renewable energy plant shall supply the electricity to the industry, and then the obligation for the industry is to primarily use the electricity from the plant and to allow, and there's maybe a question, can the industry be allowed to have a third-party supplier in case the electricity from the renewable is insufficient? I mean, that's not a question. He has always to have maximum supply of electricity for his work. And then also what happens to the surplus electricity? There's possibly the right that the industry, when it takes it all, can also sell it on to the market. And then under 4, the obligation to operate the plants at least at a certain number of the year in order to have supply security. And what happens if that obligation is not met? And the industry would have to buy additional power. And then this is where the flexibility sets in. It's not only about having flexible renewables, but also that you may be obliged to adapt your production process depending the forecast from the renewables. Again, like I had said before. And then you have naturally also the obligation by the renewable to give the forecast to the industry. And then there's probably on the price possibility of a minimum price and variable prices to give incentives to the industry to adapt consumption patterns. That is up to the best arrangement and best flexibility view of between the industry and the renewable energy provider. Again, the liability, who takes which risk in what delays if there is a disturbance in the supply, and what liability has to be excluded so that there's not all liability. For example, what is when the renewable energy provider did it wrong with the forecast? How do we work with that? Then we have the technical specification to look into. We have to have the source, the size, location. This has all to be very clear. That is then again a planning diligence which has to be put into the contract so that everybody knows from which size, from which source, and what installation they are talking about, and the location of it on site. So contract on access and use of the infrastructure is necessary if you do it on the ground of the industry, and that is also the question: do I have does the industry charge or not for any costs for access and use of the infrastructure? And that is then further to be detailed in the contract. But I will not go now into each. If not, we're sitting here tomorrow. The general terms and conditions are the same as I had already said before. And then we have special other clauses which we have to look into. So we have to take into account, for example, the discussion of the next days, which may be necessary. For example, I take as a possible variation that when what has been discussed before, that when the balancing price costs and the balancing price needs to reflect the real costs, and what happens when there is a mismatch, and also what is happening for the industry. Is it really positive to go into such flexibility contracts while they also have these obligations under, for example, energy efficiency improvements? So but that is something I think which at the end of the process the industry has to calculate itself. Where is the benefit? How is the burden from other obligations under ETS or under other constraints, if I may say that. So that is so far as we are. What I also would like to what I could do to give a little bit more of a detail. For example, if I would look how different the energy laws are, that was really interesting. For example, in Belgium, under the Belgium energy law, there is the Belgian legislation has several minimum requirements for electricity supply contracts to be met. That's following a Belgian national law. As you know, we have in Belgium also always the regional legislation, which is very important, but not to complicate is the supply contracts. The supply contract law is a national law, and there are several issues which have to be dealt in these contracts. For example, clear access point to the grid, the amount of electricity to be delivered, the arrangement to regulate how to deal with interruptions or reductions of supplied amount, clarity on prices, terms and conditions, as I said before, invoicing and payment, duration of the contract naturally. In some countries you have to give strict duration of a contract. In others you have maybe, for example, a one-year contract, and if you do not, like here, if you do not do an arrangement towards the end, it automatically would continue. Then in Belgium you also have to look, for example, in the how the effect from the green certificate scheme. You have to look into the surcharge by the Belgian state on all electricity supplied to the public grid. That is more an economic balancing also for you. In the end, you could say, okay, if I do an on-site and I take less from the grid, then I have less of the surcharge to pay. Is that enough to keep an on-site flexible renewable energy project as an interesting option or not? And then I wouldn't go now into the liability issues, which are also always different in the various countries. So maybe at this level I could stop here first, and if you want, we can go in detail also in the provisions of the various target countries on the legal side, but I think that would be quite exhausting.
Thank you, Dirk. Okay, so any comments or questions? Okay, Mukund, please go ahead.
I had one comment related to the what you call overlapping regulation. So you said industry may calculate for themselves when it is worth to supply or to fulfill energy efficiency obligations. What happens I did not see there is a obligation on, for example, industrial activity to purchase or to use the renewable energy. What happens if we are not able to use it due to some reason? Is there any penalty clause or something? And of course, vice versa, which means it should be reciprocatory.
Yes, you have to. In the contract, you have to identify this possible shortcoming. I had that on one table. So, for example, one is the wind power producer would tell you tomorrow I have that and that load available, and then the availability is not there, and then you as industry have to buy the amount, and then you have to put in the contract a liability clause. So that means that there has to be a check and balance for the reasons. Is there that what I meant also with the good faith clauses? So if there is something nobody is responsible for as a normal contract law, you have provisions of burden sharing then, let's say. And if there is clarity and you say, okay, you have promised a minimum amount of power purchase over the year, and then after a certain period you see, for example, that the power purchase will not be reached from this plant, then you need to balance that out in the contract, and then the surplus you had, but only naturally the surplus on acquiring further load can be defined in the contract, and then you have payment schedules where in most contracts I would then advise that automatically you can deduce this amount you had to have from other sources. The question is then, would there be also sort of you can probably not buy now, or you have to show that you didn't on purpose bought the most expensive energy available, but it can well be that for some time you had to go into peak power purchase.
I had a second question about when we have a windmill on our plant or a solar panel on our roof and the roof collapses. Who shares this responsibility? How is the agreement with the insurance company of either us or them?
Yeah, that then would be, if we would have, for example, where I had no time now to go in, if you would be the owner of that thing, no question, it's your insurance which would cover it. If you are just allowing the panels to be on your roof, in most cases, what we have seen so far, and that's already standard. Also, if you rent a space now as a normal power renewable power project planner, you rent a roof, and then you are liable for your insurance for fire, for damage done to the ground. There are special insurance packages available, ready-made, I would say, and that's naturally then in the obligation of the renewable energy producer.
One aspect maybe I missed was the permits. Who's going to ask the permits to put it on the side of the company?
That depends really the country. If it's there are different, that's what I meant also with ownership rules. There are different rules. Normally, in most countries, as my country, for example, the one who if I have it on site, I would. You have already a connection to the grid. I would get the right of me now, the windmiller, to use your grid access in order to help, for example, balancing load. If not for the normal, if you are not the owner and another one builds on your ground, in most cases, the other one has to get the permit. He has to do also impact assessment and all that stuff. And in most cases, also interesting who becomes de facto owner, because normally you would put this, for example, the modules on an Arubis roof would be put for a certain duration. You fix that in the contract. So, for example, in German law, if you fix something permanent on a building which is permanently fixed to the ground, you become automatically owner of that thing. Even if you have then a lease contract may then be necessary between the operator and you for the roof situation. But if it is for what we say vorübergehend, for only a terminated period, then the one who puts it on remains owner